Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The gig economy's future is uncertain. Welcome and thank you all for being here. A lot of talk about the gig economy these past few years. Uber, Lyft, Grubhub, all these jobs where you can download an app, freelance, do stuff, and you don't have to report to the man. Well, there's of course some downsides to that, but there was an opinion piece in the New York Times that caught our attention entitled "The Gig Economy Isn't the iPhone's Fault." And we're going to look at today why we need to make a choice about the future of the gig economy. And it concerns pretty much anybody who lives in the United States as in some form dependent on the economy. But of course, we can't begin a conversation that involves apps, technology, the gig economy, Uber, and all of the rest of the world's great technological advances without our tech expert.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
But this is bigger than that. I mean, the opinion piece talks about the precursor to the Industrial Revolution,
yes,
and to the precursor to this, and how what really is, I think what made the story interesting, or as it was written, was that we have a choice, that it doesn't have to go this way. I think so many people out there think, well, I have to have these apps and this is the way it's going to be. And I'm going to be a temporary worker for the rest of my life. And there are no ways that I can really get ahead in the world anymore. And this gentleman, his argument is we as a society always have a choice. And I think that's the neat part about this, that like any economy, there are goods and bads. So there's good with the gig economy. There are some negatives, but we hold the future in our hands. We get to decide as society which way we want to go with this.
Lewis Hyman writes, when we learn about the Industrial Revolution in school, we hear a lot about factories, steam engines, maybe the power loom. We are taught that technology innovation drove social change and radically reshaped the world of work. Likewise, when we talk about today's economy, we focus on smartphones, artificial intelligence, apps. But this narrative is wrong. The history of labor shows that technology does not usually drive social change. On the contrary, social change is typically driven by decisions we make about how to organize our world. Only later does technology swoop in, accelerating and consolidating those changes. I think part of what Lance and I, I'm sure, both liked about this was the history piece he mentioned. So we all probably, I'd assume most listeners to the show, are familiar with having and remember being taught about the Industrial Revolution. What we don't talk about as much is the Industrious Revolution, which predated the Industrial Revolution. And this author is arguing that basically it was necessary because it had more to do with a mindset change, the way we organized work back in the 18th century. For those of you that don't know, this was a move, and Lance, as our senior historian, can swoop in if I say something that's off base. But the way the Industrious Revolution worked is up until this point, basically everybody worked from home or very close to home. I mean, that's how it was. It didn't matter really what you did. Your home and work life were kind of one and the same in that, you did your work and produced your goods on your property, and there was a complex network that made the production of goods possible. So maybe one farmer is growing the cotton, and then there's another person that lives somewhere in the country that's going to, turn it into something we can actually use. And then another person's going to actually make the clothes. And it's this network where it just has to keep moving from person to person. And the thinking in the Industrial Revolution was, no, we're going to begin the process of separating work and personal life by organizing the same kinds of workers under the same roof in the same location so they could be supervised and managed. And we're going to pay them for their time as opposed to their output. So that's kind of where this shift begins to what we're familiar with today, which is you have a place of work or you have a company you work for, and they typically pay you in exchange for an approximation of your time. Some are more strict than others. Maybe you're salaried and you're saying, I'm not paid by the hour anymore, but you are.
But they pay you for your labor,
right? Not
necessarily your percentage of the profits.
Yes.
Whereas when you worked for yourself, when you were the farmer in the 1700s, you were working, and whatever you produced
is what you made.
You reaped.
Yeah.
I mean, whether your wife spun the extra cotton into some cloth and traded it or sold it in town for other supplies that you needed, or you harvested your apples and turned it into apple butter and sold it at the local store to turn into nails and wood that you needed to build the pig pen or whatever. You were the sole earner and you got to keep all of your profits.
For better and worse.
Right. For better or for worse.
Yep. When the things were going well, it's good. But when they're going bad, it also meant hard times because.
And so people then began to look, and I'm giving an example of what you just described. Well, hey, if I go into town, I can work for 8 hours and I'm guaranteed X amount of money every week to live off of. And that way I can make it through the good seasons and the bad seasons. I can make it through the boom or bust of capitalism. And so people began to change. And then, as they say in the article, then technology said, well, if we're going to do this anyway, let's figure out a way where we can be even more efficient. And people were fine for people who are willing to invest their money to make more money because they got a salary. They made money based on the amount of time they put in until they weren't.
Right.
And I don't want to steal your thunder because then that's the next development stage in history. When the worker said, you know what, I'm worth more than I'm paid, then you have the strikes and the contracts and the minimum wage and safe working conditions and hours and everything else. But that was all part of the evolution of the workplace.
So the New York Times article goes on to say, while often described as a second machine age, our current historical moment is better understood as a second industrious revolution. So not industrial, industrious revolution. In other words, what the author is getting at here is this is more of a change in mindset necessarily than it is a change in tech. The tech is only accelerating it and enabling it. It's been underway for at least 40 years, encompassing the collapse since the 1970s of the relatively secure wage work economy of the post-war era and the rise of post-industrialism and the service economy. So this, as we've moved forward as a society and changed how we think about what we want to do, it's no longer most of the way it used to be, which is only the ultra wealthy paid other people to do things for them, to do a service for them. Up until then, you had to do pretty much all of it yourself. If you wanted your yard trimmed, you had to trim it yourself. Mm-hmm. If you wanted a tree cut down, you had to do it yourself. There wasn't really people you could go pay to do these things typically. And so this is where this shift begins of, probably from about the 50s on, really with the building of the quote unquote American dream, this idea that no, I don't have to choose just city or country. I can have this in-between space where I can pay people to do the jobs I don't want to do.
Well, you used to have to make your own food, cook your own meal.
Yeah.
Well, now you don't have to. I mean, now, how many people eat out? We just advanced that technology. The apps have just said, now you don't even have to leave your home.
Right.
Now you can have the food, you can order it and have it delivered.
Yeah.
But that whole concept of not having to do those basic fundamental things yourself. You can send your laundry out and have somebody else do it.
Yep.
They'll pick it up for you and do it, bring it back to you, and you don't have to be bothered with it.
You have it all folded.
That's all service economy.
And the only the downside to the service economy, obviously the upside is the convenience it affords those who are making use of it. The downside is kind of as we've seen, for example, with janitorial work, how it used to be an in-house kind of thing, right? Where organizations, that was part of their staff. So it was actually feasible for a janitor to move up inside of a company. But now as we've moved toward the service economy, you have companies that's all they do. And if you're a janitor in a janitorial company, there's not a lot of space to go places.
Well, and are you a part of the profit sharing?
Right.
Because if you worked for GM or, J.C. Penney's or Sears, I think it was the store.
Sears is the one we did this story on.
Where, okay, you were a janitor, but you got profit sharing just like salesmen, just like the stockholders in the company itself, So you were rewarded for your work within the company. But in this new service economy, those kinds of things don't exist. So not only is there not that upward movement that's available, but you're not invested in the company. You're not earning seniority. You're not earning anything extra because you're working hard for the company. You're just a removable piece that does a job. And when you do the job, we'll pay you X amount of money, which is nice because if you get tired of doing it, you can move to something else.
Right.
But the downside is that there's not a lot of job stability and job security.
Yep.
So, that's the yin and the yang, the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's been a big appeal. And this next stat, I think, speaks to how much the gig economy has permeated our lives. Because maybe you're listening right now and you're thinking, well, it's not really affected my life. It's not something that I personally participate in. But listen to this. In the past 10 years, 94% of net new jobs have appeared outside of traditional employment. 94%. Already, approximately 1/3 of all workers and half of young workers participate in this alternative world of work, either as a primary or supplementary source of income. So that's a lot. There's 1/3 of all workers and half of young workers participate to some degree in this new gig economy. So there's no doubt that it's had positive impact from the standpoint of these are people who may not have been able to find other jobs as we have this growing population. Lance and I have talked some about, we talked about universal basic income, which name is maybe changing. And by the way, we have a guest coming on, right, for that in the near future. So I think 2 weeks out on a Wednesday, we're going to have him on, Scott Santons, to tell us about how it's changed. But some of these ideas are as we advance as a society and as some of these older routine jobs go away, there's this weird gray area that we have to kind of decide, do we want to replace those old jobs with new stable jobs, or do we want to replace them with these gig type jobs where most people, because again, it's not always easy to remember, but technically the way the government views somebody who is full-time with Uber is they own their own business. Even if it's just them, they are a small business owner and they are their business because they're working as an independent contractor. So this has been corporate America's looked at this as a great way to avoid the common expenses associated with quote unquote employing someone, and small business. I don't want to just pin it on corporate America. Lots of small businesses look at this as if somebody doesn't want to be an employee or is open to, just being a contractor, why wouldn't I say yes? Saves me time. I don't have to fill out the paperwork, saves me money. I don't have to pay, that extra in employment taxes and all of that. So,
and then it allows you as the worker to choose when you want to work and how much you want to work,
right?
Which is a plus side. But I was going to, as you talk about the gig economy, back in the late 70s, there were all kinds of temporary agencies around. I remember being in college and working through a temp agency and doing a lot of different jobs for a little bit of time. So again, this isn't something new, where we talk about temporary workers and you don't have a full-time job or whatever. I remember one summer I worked 3 different jobs during the entire summer through a temp employment agency because I had one job that was first shift, another job that was second shift, and a third job that was third shift based on, part-time, like 2 or 3 days a week. I wouldn't do it forever, but I got 60 hours a weekend, and so it was making me some money. So this whole idea of temporary workers is not new. That's something that I was doing back in the 70s. What is new, and I've watched it, is the death of labor unions. And that's a part of the story that the story doesn't cover when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, is that workers joined together to get a lot of rights. But now I talk to young people and they're complaining, but unions are a 4-letter word. And it's like, well, if you don't unionize, you're going to be, in these air quotes, taken advantage of by businesses and by the government, such as Uber. I mean, you're an Uber driver. That's great. You get to pick your hours. You're taxed at a different rate. You're treated differently. You have some independence. That's wonderful. But if people decide not to choose that option that night after the concert or after the ball game, or they don't go out and eat because the weather's bad, you're not guaranteed anything.
Or Uber flops.
Right.
Or it replaces you with automated drivers.
And then you're going to something else and, an automated cars, right. And then the automated driver.
All those risks.
But what we had before was, we had these groups of workers who joined together and not only got rights from the company, but got rights from the government, the minimum wage and those different kinds of things. That's not a big deal to people anymore. I mean, I think it's starting to. And that's where I like the end of this article, because it starts to talk about we have a choice. Okay. So do we as workers want to go back to that, or are we okay? Do we want our independence more than we want a security net of income? And it goes back to the first industrial revolution and the industrious revolution. Do you want to work on the farm yourself and work in a boom and bust era, and you're responsible for yourself and you save your own money and you open up your own IRA or 401k because Social Security is not going to take care of you and you determine when you work? And wonderful. But when you don't, read about the boom and bust cycles of capitalism in the United States throughout the 18th century or in the 19th century.
We're enjoying a good book on that right now.
And what people don't understand is people suffered and people died because there was no social network from the government to save people. And people would say, well, yeah, but they didn't have to pay the taxes either. You're right. But then your survival was all on you. And we decided we didn't like that. Now, we can turn away from that, which I think is what we're doing now. We are what I think we're doing is that we still want the social safety net, but we don't want to have to pay the taxes for it.
Right.
And it's like, folks, you can't have it both ways. This goes way back in the history of this show. I've always said, I'm fine. Do away with all the safety nets. I'll take care of my family.
But most people don't think about what that means because
no, they don't.
It's easy for, we'll keep going on this in just a second. Cause as you were talking, I was having this thought about when we talk about, for example, making something from scratch. So I'm going to tell you what I mean by that here in a moment. But before we do, Lance, what's TrueChat working to do as a network?
Man, we are trying to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
I think we're doing that.
And again, I'm working on my respectful stuff. I'm getting older. I'm trying to be more respectful. Not telling people they're stupid. Not calling people names.
That's right.
Because sometimes you just got to say what it is. But I'm trying to be respectful.
I think we're doing it. I think
I'm
job.
Accomplishing that. Yes. I feel I'm patting myself on the back. I'm like the president.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for all the good things I've done for the country this year. That's what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful that the listeners have me to listen to because I think that I just provide them with so much.
So much gratitude.
Sorry, I still got my slam in.
So much thanks. Yeah. So if you think we're not upholding the mission, ethics@truechat.org, send us an email and we'll work to correct it. But we do want your thoughts on the gig economy. Are you part of it? And if so, how has it benefited you? Talk to us about it at TrueChat.org, social media, your preference. Twitter's pretty easy though, so you can head over there and answer that question. Again, are you part of the gig economy? If so, how's it benefited you? And if you're not, why not? What's kept you from entering it? So what I was talking about before is making stuff from scratch. We talked about this on our food special. Like I say, I make bread from scratch. I make it from scratch based on our modern understanding of what from scratch means. You
didn't pound the oats and the grains?
No.
With a pestle and mortar?
No.
Okay.
Well, we got to go back, right? I didn't grow. I didn't find the seed and bury it in the ground and grow the oats, harvest the oats.
Haul the water.
Right. Turn it into, grind it down into flour. No, I went to a store and I bought a bag of flour.
Gotcha.
So
you missed 3 or 4 steps there.
That's right.
From scratch.
Yeah. Well, and the yeast, I didn't go out and, get the yeast. I went to a store and bought a little package of yeast. So some of this is.
But you also didn't do like me and buy a frozen roll and just let it rise and throw it in the oven.
Right.
I mean, that yours was a little more from scratch than mine was.
Yes. Yeah. There's varying degrees of, I laugh when people say, it's like they'll bring something in to school or whatever it is, right? And they'll, so-and-so made these cookies. Okay. What does that mean though? Cause did they buy the prepackaged cookie and just, put them on the sheet, or did they mix the ingredients, quote unquote, from scratch?
You calling me out? Those cookies this morning.
Yeah.
They're from scratch.
Yeah.
Yep.
I could tell.
I melted the butter, used the flour. I didn't buy no pre-baked break apart cookies. I got the dirty mixing bowls, the
dirty mixing bowls,
and the sore wrists from stirring and everything else.
I didn't
even get out the mixer. I just did it myself with a spoon.
I don't even have a mixer, so
okay,
that's really from scratch. And you got that elbow grease in there. Mix that dough. That's tough. I tell you what, if you've never mixed dough, you can see why. It was a full-time job.
You see why those old farm women were strong. And could, birth cows and everything else.
That's hard work.
They had some muscles.
People discount that.
Hauling firewood and everything else for their ovens.
So that's my point in bringing that up, is a lot of people don't think about how difficult life truly would be. It's like, I could make meals and stuff. And it's like, well, but do you know how to go hunt an animal? And, where are you going to get the ammo? And you get into all this stuff where it's like, people really don't think about just how complicated life used to be.
Yeah, because you made your own bullets.
You
melted your own metal and alloys and made the bullets.
Or your own bow and arrow or whatever. Because that's what you had to do. You couldn't just go get these things. There wasn't a Wally World down the street that you could just.
I bought my ribs and put them in my smoker. I made these from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. You had to go, you either had to raise the pig or go hunt the pig and, then butcher the pig. And it makes sense why, when you think about how people used to live, that they just didn't have time for a lot else. Just putting food on the table was a major chore that consumed a lot of the day. And now, and we talked about that just an episode or two ago, where I said, as we look at the benefits of what this artificial intelligence and self-driving cars are going to bring us, is it's going to continue to decrease the thing that, in my opinion, has been one of the largest things that has shaped our history, is the time it takes us to stuff our faces. Because we have to. It's one of those things that, as biological beings, we're not yet capable of escaping the desire or need to eat. And it so much controls everything we do. Our days are built around meal times. And, weekly shopping for most people is common. It's all part of how it works. And the more we advance technologies, the more I think it's clear that we continue to make choices about decreasing the time that it takes to service our most basic of needs.
But is that a good thing?
And that's
because I'm going to bring up the whole idea
the debate
of the communal living with your family, with your friends, with your spouse, your roommates. And that is, food brings us together so that we can sit down and discuss things and learn to live together. As we become more and more independent in our food intake, that drives a bigger wedge between us as a communal society.
Yes. And there's,
do you understand that with what, that was just exploding in my head when you said that. If we take less time and mealtime becomes less and less a part of the day, what happens to the development of friendship and camaraderie and family ties and social ties within our communities if we don't take the time in the kitchen and we don't take the time to sit at a table? And I know I'm really speaking archaically. Because I grew up where we all sat down for dinner together. It just happened.
Right. That was part of the process.
Until you got to high school and started driving. So you're 16, 17, sophomore, junior year of high school. We sat down as a family. Now, if you had a practice or an event, then you drove yourself, but mom still had a plate of food and you sat down at the table, and mom and or dad might have come over and sat down with you and talked to you about your day. You take all of that out, what does that do to the fracturing of our society?
The interesting thing, because not only on the social level, but I think there's also, having grown up where I did and having raised different animals, both beef and chicken, that were for human consumption, in one respect, I think there's an appreciation too that we gain from taking time to think about, one, the person who prepared the food, but also how the food came to us. Because even though we're developing more efficient systems, which are necessary, I don't want people to get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we have to go back to the way everything was as far as the way food was grown, because the reality is, unless we're going to have some really tough conversations about how to curb our population, we have to pursue more efficient means of food cultivation, aside from, as we've learned over time. I was going to
say, it isn't necessary. It's a choice we're making as a society, which is the main point of this article. These are choices that we are making.
Right. But the point there is there's a much larger conversation that we get into about what to do about population. Assuming that we're unwilling to have those conversations about how to control our growing population, then the only answer is to figure out more sustainable practices of agriculture, the way that we get the food that we intake. And that's not all bad from a natural standpoint either. Some of the practices we've developed in the last just 40 or 50 years are very unnatural processes. Much of the way American agriculture today is handled is not at all what it quote unquote, used to be like. So when we look at some of the new improvements in that technology, some of that is very beneficial to making good food available to more people. But I guess my point in all of that was
the demand of society.
Yeah.
Society wanted it, so we found a way to provide it. Again, which is the premise of the article, is technology didn't change the way we took in food. The demand for us to take food in a different way,
right,
stimulated the technological changes that gave it to us the way we wanted to, the way we want it.
Yeah. Technology doesn't come prior to the desire for the solution. You can't have the solution without first establishing the problem. And technology, we have to be careful about making sure we remember we view technology, it's the solution. It's not and it's funny that, we get Lance and I on a show to admit that technology isn't the problem. It is only the result of a solution to a problem we decided we had. And what I was getting at with the food there is it's both the social gathering and the remembering about there was effort put into the food being delivered. And that's not just a respect the people who brought you food. It's a respect the ecosystem necessary to bring you that food. Because that's part of why we're in the situation we are now with our climate is, well, we just got to feed people and it doesn't matter how we get it done, you know? So it's just tear down the forests and cultivate the land and feed them, because that's what people want, without really thinking about, well, is that, can we keep our planet alive behaving in that way? So there's a lot that goes into that, but I did want to highlight, because I wrote this down when you were talking, the positive of the economy that we're in now, this tech economy. We are seeing an uptick in the desire for good quality food. And part of that has been addressed by Blue Apron and HelloFresh, organizations like them that ship meal kits to you. And this is an interesting way of a return to making more meals at home and less waste. Because I think a big thing that I've found is when I buy just straight raw ingredients from the store, it can be really difficult to plan accordingly to not waste much. Even if I'm trying, you know, it's like, we got too much of this thing. What am I going to do with that now? I either have to go buy more stuff to be able to use this, and then I'll have leftovers over that. You know, it's this. And the appeal of the Blue Apron HelloFresh model is, of course, that it manages the way we want to live while also bringing back something that seems to have been forgotten and doing it in a sustainable way. So it's not, and this is what this guy wraps up with, is I'm neither for nor against temping or consulting or freelancing. If the emergent flexible economy were all bad or all good, there would be no need to make a choice about it. For some, the rise of the gig economy represents liberation from the stifled world of corporate America. We can't turn back the clock, but neither is job insecurity inevitable. Just as the post-war period managed to make industrialization benefit industrial workers, we need to create new norms, institutions, and policies that make digitization benefit today's workers. Pundits have offered many paths forward, quote, portable benefits, universal basic income, worker reclassification. But regardless of the option, the important thing to remember is that we do all have a choice.
Amen. That's what I liked about the article.
Yeah.
Is it starts out, it's like, I'm not going to like this. And when it gets to the end, we are the masters of our future. We get to decide how we want to live. If you like the directions we're going, then you can continue to do these kinds of things. But if we don't, and we stand up and say, we want to cook meals at home, we want to do these things, then technology will change. Whereas you can order your groceries online and go pick them up or have them delivered to you. So you're not using that time of work to do that, yet you can still cook at home and you can keep the rhythm of life of, you know, preparing food and enjoying it together as a family and those kinds of things. So again, I think that's the major point of this piece is we can't say technology is running our life. We get to choose how we want to live, and then technology will make it easier for us to live that way. So that's the question people have to answer.
Yep.
How do we as a society want to live? Technology will follow.
Only by understanding that the fact that we can act to make capitalism work for us, not work us over, is how he ends the article. And on that, let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org and find TrueChat podcasts anywhere that fine podcasts are found. For the State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
Spotify, I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.